And hey guys, just wanted to finish up with a few cool little final topics as we wind up this next semester here. And the first one that we're going to do is, let me share this. Perfect. Let me get this saved and shared. Share the screen. There we go. And here we are. Oh, let me get out of this. And let's get the PowerPoint. And here we go. So this is a really brief let me just fix this here. Sorry about that. Really brief issue on the lensometer. I put the form there, but I wanted to show it to you. And if we looked at the reticles when you're trying to do Prism, these are the reticles in which we would see from 0 to 90 to 180 and 1, 2, 3 up and what have you. And generally when we're looking for Prism, or it could look like this. There's a couple different ways it can look. In general, it's pretty straightforward. You can see the 1, you can see the 2, you can see the 3. So if I'm looking at the right eye, if you look at the form, if I went 1, 2, 3 up, and this was a right eye, it would be 3 up. Here, what you see is what you get is what the terminology I was always taught. But again, if you see 3 up, I didn't tell you how you got there. It could be a plus lens that was moved up, a minus lens that was moved down. It could simply be a plano where the prism was ground in there. I didn't tell you how you got there, just to know that it's 3 up or 3 down. We also know that if we go to the right, it would be base in a right eye if I'm looking at it in the lensometer. And if it was to the right, it would be base out if it were a left eye as I'm looking at it in the lensometer. And the opposite would be if I'm looking at it here, if this were a right eye and it was to the left, it would be base out. If it was in the lensometer and I'm looking at a lens and the prism is to my left, it would be base in. And the way I always look at that is pretend there's a pair of glasses staring at you. I think I have a cool form here. Like this. I like this right here. So I always try to pretend as if this were a pair of glasses looking at me. Pretend that the pair of glasses is here looking out at me. Well, if I'm looking at the reticles and this is to my right, if there were a pair of glasses that were centered and the reticles were centered in the glasses, it would be to the right or towards the nose, base in. And that's sort of how you could determine. So on the right, it would be up is up, down is down, to my right is in, to my left is out. Well, the opposite would be for the glasses, and I won't belabor the point, but this is an easy way to look at in or out or left or right or up or down when you're looking at this. And that's all fine and dandy and all. But let me look as well, because a lot of times we don't have anything as dramatic as 2 or 3 or 4 up. And remember from your other classes, you do have the prism compensating devices where you could actually dial with no prism in, down. And if I had 3 down, with the prism reticles with no glasses on, without glasses in the lensometer, and then I put a pair of glasses in and it said 3 up. Well, if I'm starting from 3 down and I see 3 up, the difference is 6 up. It's a way for us to be able to see more prism in the lensometer than I would normally have. That's why we have those little prism compensating devices, to be able to move the device when there's more than the device will allow. But that's all stuff that you've ostensibly covered in other classes. But I wanted to zero in on something a little bit more dramatic, and that's this right here. And that is, a lot of times we're dealing with amounts of prism in the term of maybe a third. Our horizontal imbalance, our vertical imbalance allowance for ANSI for lower powers is 1/3 of a diopter. And the question is, when we're doing 1/3, or if you had a -5 at 90, ANSI allows you to be off by 1 millimeter up and down. If the power is 90, at 90 is 5, you're allowed 1, it's 5 times 1 divided by 10, you're allowed a half a diopter. So I dotted up on one eye, bring it over to the other. If it's on center on the right and goes over to the left and I have a half With a -5, if it's a half or less, it's within ANSI. If it's over a half, it's no good. The question is, what is a half? What is a third? What is a quarter? How do you measure it? And if you were to look carefully at these reticles here, and this is what I wanted to get to for this lecture, is this reticle versus this reticle are actually different. They're different amounts. And when you're taking tests, if you're in clinic using these, this is the one I've grown up on. This is the one in the standardized test that we have, the ABO practical. And quite frankly, we have both in our clinic. And if you see, this one here comes all the way down, and there's a 1, 2, 3, which is great. But within the 1, there's an additional circle. And then this comes all the way down and stops. Well, around this circle, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and they all stop. This pattern, if you'll notice, is different than this. I have 3, 2, 1. But now, instead of having another circle within the 1, right here, there's one circle. This is a circle within the 1. Within the 1, there is no circle here. But notice how the pattern looks different. Here, it comes through the circle and stops. This comes through the circle and stops. But here, there's a little check mark almost, if you will. Actually, if you look at the side, it looks a little bit like Deadpool. But be that as it may. This, if I'm looking here, is actually dramatically different in what this tells me in terms of scale as opposed to this one. And if you don't see it just by looking at it, I do want to walk you through this. So let's look at this one more closely. Then we'll look at this one more closely. So this is the more common one. And this, if you'll notice, is just a close-up version of here, where it comes all the way through. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 for the circle that's within 1. So let's take a look at that. Here's this circle of number 1. And obviously anything along this in any direction would be 1 prism diopter. It'd be up. 1 diopter up would be right here. 1 down would be here. If it's along the circle 1 here, if it's to the right, it would be in for a right eye. It would be out for a left. Anything around this would be 1 diopter. And that's easy. It's labeled. You can't mess that up. You just can't. However, the inner circle that's not labeled for this particular device is 1/2 of 1 diopter. And it's all the way around, up, down, in for a right, out for a right, out for a left, in for a left. You get the idea. But notice how each of these all come in and stop at the same rate. Stop, same distance, same distance, same distance. And each of these are exactly a quarter, a quarter, a quarter, a quarter, a quarter. So now if I have something where it's right here, that's a half. Right here's a quarter. Halfway between the two, you have to use your judgment. That's 0.75 right here. Well, these are all pretty straightforward. Now where this gets a little difficult is what is really a third? Because if we're allowed a third, there's nowhere on here that says a third. Well, if this is 0.25 and this is 0.5, this is 1/4, this is 1/2, then right in between would be 3/8. It's about 0.375. Well, 1/3 is actually between this quarter and the mid rate. So a third is actually not halfway. It's a little bit less than halfway. And that you have to use your judgment to see whether it's at 1/3 or not. I would argue that if you're looking for a third and you get exactly halfway or above, it's absolutely more than a third. It's no good. Kick it and make it over again. So again, 1, a half, a quarter, a quarter, a quarter, a quarter in all directions. Pretty straightforward. Well, we can look at a half, we can look at a quarter, we can look at 3/4, we can look at 1, 1.5. You get the idea. Well, let's go to the other reticle, which looks different. Here, I have the circle at 1, but there's no inner circle anymore. There is no half circle, and there are no quarters here. It's a little bit different. So what we're going to do is 1, well, let me go to this big one right here. Obviously, this one is 1. The one that the circle that's labeled. This one is 2, the circle that's labeled. You would imagine the little hash mark between 1 and 2 would give me exactly 1.5. But there's no half circle in here, and there's lots of different hashes. Now you can measure it out yourself, or you can just deduce, or I'll just tell you what each of these hash marks mean. So if we look right here, this that comes all the way through the 1 and stops, if you were to measure dead center to the 1 circle, this stops halfway. which would mean at the end of this here is exactly 1/2. So that's 1, that's a half. This is 1, this is a half. Well, these little hash marks here don't line up with this. The half is actually the midway between this. This little hash mark is precisely the same distance, but it's farther away from the circle. And if you actually measured it, it's a quarter, another quarter, another quarter, another quarter on dead center. So what that means is if you're doing dead center, that's great, but this first hash mark right here is actually a quarter. Halfway up is a half. Right here is 3/4. And then 1. So this one is actually slightly more useful because I have on this one a half and a quarter, but that's it. This one I have 1, I have a quarter, I have a half, and I have 3/4. So it's literally just a separate way to sort of to calibrate or to measure where the prism is. I'm accustomed to this older one right here. This one's a little bit more popular these days, but I want to make sure that if you look at this, don't assume this is a quarter and that's a quarter and that's a quarter and that's a quarter. It's not. This is a different beast than this one right here. So let's just keep that under our hats, and I'll stop right here as a quick aside. This was a quick and dirty one, and the next one I'm going to do is the compound prism, and then I'll post them both separately.